Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Kelsey Dunbar and Marc Rogala. Marc and Kelsey are the co-founders of Suffer to Tougher, a resilience and mental wellness movement that's dedicated to helping people overcome life's challenges and build stronger, healthier lives. Kelsey is a best-selling author, speaker, coach, and fitness professional with over 30 years of experience helping individuals transform their health and mindset. His personal journey from childhood obesity, addiction struggles with his parents, and adversity fuels his passion for helping others discover that lasting change is possible. Marc's story is one of recovery, rebuilding, and redemption. After battling alcohol and substance addiction, Marc transformed his life and now uses his experiences to inspire others who are facing similar struggles. His authenticity and willingness to share both the victories and setbacks have made him a powerful voice for hope and resilience. Together, they host the Rebuild and Fulfill podcast, where they have honest conversations about mental health, addiction recovery, personal growth, and overcoming adversity. They are also co-authors of the best-selling book, Suffer to Tougher, and are committed to helping people realize that their struggles do not define them. Their response to those struggles does. And with that, Marc and Kelsey, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for quite some time now.
Yeah, us as well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So I'm going to open it up with one of the standard questions that I ask all of my podcast guests. And whoever wants to go first with this, Kelsey or Marc can. But I'd like each of you to tell our audience about the major experience or experiences that have shaped your life passions today.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kel.
So for me, my journey revolving mental health started at a very young age. When I was 4, father decided to peace out. At 5, I instantly had a stepfather. My stepfather and my mother liked to go out and party a lot. And I guess the kids were kind of getting in the way. And so we were starting to raise ourselves, which ended up putting me in military school at 7 years old. And at that age, the school that I was at would feed all the kids the same amount of food, whether you're 7 or you're 13, and you would get SWATs or demerits that go against your dorm or classroom if you didn't eat all your food. So I started actually developing a weight problem. And then in the summers and in Christmas break, I would also be overeating because I didn't have any friends to play with because all my friends were spread across the country. And so I didn't really have anyone that I knew. And so I used to eat my feelings and I developed a weight problem. And as I said, with the self-esteem issues that come along with that, and also having parents that are alcoholics, it started to turn into a mental health problem. And by the time that I graduated high school, I had to fight suicidal ideologies that I dealt with almost on a daily basis, and eventually decided that I was going to either lose weight and start appreciating myself, or I was going to decide that it was time to take my life. And so I basically made a deal with God and said, I'm going to do my best to fight against this, and you're either going to take care of me or I'm going to decide that I don't need to be here anymore. I honestly thought I was going to fail. And, but at least then I would feel justified in taking my life. And time went by. I started walking. I started watching what I was eating. I started trying to learn what I could, and I started to lose weight, and I started to feel better about myself. And I said, wow, I really wish I would have had someone in my life that would have been able to tell me how to do this a long time ago, and I wouldn't have had such a terrible childhood. And that's when I decided to become a fitness coach. And I've spent 30 years in that profession. And until Mark and I started having conversations together, I always coached with the idea that what I'm doing is helping people lose weight so that they can feel better about themselves, rather than helping them feel better about themselves. And by doing so, it would help them to do all the things for their brain that would also benefit their bodies and establish those habits so much better and allow them to get better physically while they were also healing mentally. And the conversations that Mark and I had led to Suffer to Tougher. Now I'll let Mark go.
Well, I mean, I guess my mental health dates all the way back to when I was a lot younger as well. But where my story is different is I didn't realize I had underlying mental health until I started actually working with a therapist, already in the weeds of addictions, battling alcohol and opiates, because I was introduced to painkillers as a result of a neck and back issue. Um, I've been in the insurance industry for 30 years, got married at 19 years old. A college dropout, married my high school sweetheart, had my son, so that's when I started in the insurance industry. And, pretty much had a normal family life. I stayed away from alcohol for a good period of time because there is some alcoholism that runs in my family. But slowly but surely, as the stresses of life started to take hold, being that commission and then eventually go into management and have a team of 30 sales reps that you're responsible for, have 4 children. I have one daughter, my middle daughter, that struggles on the mental health side as well. I slowly started catching myself going to the bars after work with my sales reps, going out for a few drinks after work. And the diet really wasn't good either. A lot of fast food, no meal prep whatsoever, put on a lot of weight. And as a result of that weight gain, I developed a neck and back issue. And they had 2 conflicting test results. I had an MRI that did not show a pinched nerve, and I had an electromyogram that did show a pinched nerve. He referred me to a pain doctor. And when I was referred to the pain doctor in the first meeting or the first visit, the first consultation, he introduced me to prescription pain medication. Now, truth be told, knowing what I know now, he certainly overprescribed because he prescribed 120 pain pills and 90 muscle relaxers with 4 refills at the very first visit. So if you do the math, that's somewhere in the vicinity of 800 pills. But I had an ignorance back then when it came to mental health. I had an ignorance when it came to medication. I didn't do my research. I really didn't realize that a painkiller was an opiate or rewires your brain to become physically addicted. I did realize that if I took it, it took away my physical pain, and I was able to sleep in bed next to my wife for the first time in 7 months. But, just like anything else, 1 became 2, 2 became 3, but then not realizing that I had underlying mental health. Got to the point where I was going to the streets to supplement my pills because I was running through my scripts before the end of the month. The addictions grabbed hold fairly quickly. At the end, I was a fentanyl addict, but I never did like street stuff. I would buy like the pills initially that I was being prescribed by the doctor on the streets. And then once my tolerance level grew to such a point that I would buy higher pain medication, and then ultimately at the end, I was buying fentanyl patches just because no matter how much I took, I would waking up sick every single day. Where that took me, I lost my marriage at 25 years. I lost my relationship with my children. They haven't talked to me in 8 years. I got grandchildren I haven't met. Multiple overdoses, multiple visits to treatment. Car accident, my head went through the windshield. Woke up on a ventilator. Got a DUI for that, so I have some legal issues. I mean, it was pretty chaotic there for a very brief amount of time, and we're talking probably about a 2.5, 3-year period where all that happened. We're not talking about a lifetime. But what happened was, it was my last overdose. It was my most significant overdose. I woke up in intensive care. I was told that I had some kidney damage and some liver damage, and they were trying to get the functions under control. But my mom had signed a form that said if they were able to get it under control, for me to go to psychiatric care because I pretty much was dead. I mean, they had to revive me. I had to get Narcan multiple times. And, when I found out that my mom had signed the form, I really didn't want to go to psychiatric care because I was down there before. I was fighting security guards in my room. I mean, I was not a good patient. And the psychiatrist pretty much came in and said, you know what, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter what you try, you're going down there. They actually classified that overdose as a suicide attempt. because they said I had suicidal ideologies as a result of the amount of drugs and alcohol found in my system. So when I went down there, I really went down there with the intention of just being a good patient, going through all the group sessions, try to get out of there as quick as possible, maybe within a few days, 3, 4 days. Honestly, at that point, go home, do more drugs and die. I really didn't see any way out of it. And by the grace of God, on the third day that I was down in psychiatric care, they sent in a gentleman to share a life experience. And the irony of it was he was an African-American gentleman from the south side of Chicago, and his drug of choice was heroin. And he had quite the run with heroin. And, he was doing street stuff. I was doing prescriptions, heroin, was an opiate, Norcos or whatever. I was fentanyl, it's all opiates. I mean, it's the same drug of choice. And when he shared his story with me, as chaotic as my story was over a brief period of time, he started talking about his upbringing and his mental health diagnosis and so forth, and what he faced and how many times he was in treatment. When I speak at the hospitals now, I kind of joke. I'm like, his story made my story seem like Disney World. But here he is speaking. He didn't, quote unquote, look like a drug addict, because again, that's where my ignorance was. And I walked up to him afterwards. And at this point, if he would have told me to run through a brick wall, I would have tried running through a brick wall. And he told me what I needed to do. And I listened. And I listened because, in my opinion, he had credibility. Because when he did his presentation and spoke about his journey, he shared things that no psychiatrist or no therapist ever shared with me before, because he was sharing his experience. And to me, he had like the street creds, if you will. I listened to everything that man told me to do. Instead of going home and doing more drugs and dying, I went to treatment for the last time. I did a PHP program, an IOP program, and then I really focused on my recovery. And then I knew I wanted to get active doing what he did, because he changed my life in 45 minutes. So once I got about a year sober, I got really active in the recovery community. I started speaking at the hospitals, just like that gentleman did.
Yeah, it's amazing. Our angels come in very unlikely forms, and that you were meant to hear that message when you heard that message. I had a couple of observations for both of your stories. I see some commonalities, is that alcohol is very much a big part of both of your lives. And that early experience does matter. For Kelsey, you said your biological father pieced out. You had a stepfather at 5. There were obviously abandonment issues where you pretty much had to figure things out for yourself. And it appears that the emptiness and the pain that you went through was channeled into food. A lot of stress eating, a lot of emptiness eating. And I can identify with that. I mean, I've had challenges with food all of my life, basically because I was raised in a Lebanese household. And with the Lebanese household or Italian households, well, you got to eat or you don't come back. So food was a part of our culture. We had family dinners. And so, and a lot of times I think even prosperity was even gauged by the size of your stomach. And so I struggled with that. And then about 2021, about 5.5 years ago, I looked at my wife and I said, I weigh 252 pounds. I can't get into 2 pairs of pants I bought 6 months ago. I got to do something. So I went on Noom. I redefined my relationship with food, started working out, dropped about 70 pounds, and I've kept it off. And it's 71 years old, almost 71 years old. I feel better now than I did when I was 35. So, but I could see where alcohol is a big part of both of your lives. I mean, there's a generational history, Marc, of alcoholism in your family that just carried on to you, right down to you. And, obviously your parents' experience with alcohol contributed to another form of challenge and addiction for you.
Right.
But the common ground is that you both have transcended your challenges, you by helping individuals realize that a healthy body means a healthy mind and vice versa. And you by sharing your story and helping individuals who have is helping them overcome the challenges with addiction. So I could see why the two of you got together. So
that's actually an interesting story too. Kelsey, you want to explain it, or you want me to explain it the way I explain it?
Go for it.
So I knew Kelsey in high school, but I really didn't know him in high school because he was older than me. And I was a little socially awkward, really didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. Thus the undiagnosed mental health of, general anxiety. And fast forward, I don't know, pretty much 30 years from high school, maybe 28, 29 years from high school, a gentleman that graduated from Kelsey's high school class reached out to me on Messenger because I started getting real open, honest, and transparent on Facebook, sharing messages on social media and things like that. And he was looking for some guidance on some addictive tendencies. And I started working with them, started going to meetings with them, started talking about what I call mindset resets, positive affirmations, getting his diet under control, getting active in the gym, all the stuff that I was doing up until that particular time. And he kept telling me, you need to talk to Kelsey. He's really good friends with Kelsey because he graduated in Kelsey's high school class. You need to talk to Kelsey. Well, in my mind, I'm picturing Kelsey as the gentleman that I remember in high school. And then he hit me with, he's a fitness coach and works with people getting their fitness and nutrition straight. And he's been doing it for 30 years. And he works with a lot of people that got eating addictions. And I'm like, are we talking about the same Kelsey? And he's like, oh, I forgot. He goes, you don't know anything about his current life. He completely transformed his life, this, that, whatever. I said, connect us. And he did. He connected us. And Kelsey and I started talking. And it was unbelievable how the synergy was there, even though he's dealing with a different type of, clientele. I'm dealing with people struggling with alcohol and substances. He's got people dealing with eating. I mean, an addiction's an addiction. And a lot of the daily rituals and the mindset resets and so forth, it's the same thing. I mean, literally what he does with his clients is what I was doing with individuals that were approaching me. And then he had some history of writing books. I didn't think I was capable of writing a book. I had self-doubt at that time. And he really pushed me. He said, we got to get this out there because there's so many people struggling right now, because he would hear me talk about how many people are reaching out for assistance on social media, texting me, all that stuff. And we ended up writing the book. So that's kind of how that came together.
Let's talk about the book, Suffer Tougher from Rock Bottom to Real Strength. Tell our audience what the book is about, what you want readers to take away from it, and what you hope the long-lasting impact is going to be from your writing.
So Suffer Tougher, we like to think of as a guidebook for daily living. So for a lot of people who have never been through treatment, haven't gone through recovery, it's a great way to get started that might lead to you deciding to go get help and treatment. Or it could be for somebody who's coming out of treatment as a way to get back to real life and do it without having a relapse. So, and then anybody in between. And so we think of it as anybody who has any kind of mental health struggle. There's a few key words that I feel like are very misunderstood. Number one, addiction. Okay, we've just laid it out here. Marc comes from an alcohol and substance abuse addiction. I come from a food addiction, but there's also gambling addictions, shopping addictions, you name it, you can have an addiction. But a lot of times when people think addiction, they automatically think substances. There's a lot of different other addictions. Here's another one, grief. Okay, grief. I just did a podcast that I put out yesterday that grief isn't just about death. You can grieve the career you thought you were going to have that you never did. You can grieve the young body that you had that you don't have anymore. You can grieve a relationship that you lost or a job that you lost. There's all different types of grief. And then the other one that I like to talk about is recovery. Okay, recovery, again, people think that means substances. You could be recovering from anything. So we try to set people straight on the different definitions of those words and how they can relate to different people. So anybody that has any of those things going on in their life, the book helps you to figure out how to move forward. And so it goes into exercise, it goes into nutrition. Marc is huge on brain chemistry, and I've learned a lot from him on brain chemistry and how, certain foods affect your serotonin levels and your oxytocin levels and, things like, your endorphins, which, I do have more experience with that, the exercise effect. But we talk about all that in the book, but we do it in a very conversational way where people don't feel like they're getting thrown a bunch of jargon that they can't understand. It's just, they read the book and it's like just listening to the two of us talking to each other, just a couple of dudes trying to figure out how to get healthy.
Honestly, you can pretty much put the addiction aside, you can pretty much put in the category of self-help, because we've had people who have diabetes that completely transformed their lives. Going back to that gentleman that spoke to me in the hospital, he told me straight up, he goes, I don't know how long you're going to be in treatment for, but you hear me loud and clear. The real work doesn't start till you're discharged from all medical care and you wake up that first morning and it's on you to do all the things you need to do to live a recovery lifestyle. He goes, when you get discharged, you might go to a meeting, you might have a therapist appointment or what have you. He goes, that might take an hour, maybe 2 hours out of your day. He goes, what are you going to do on those days where you got 22 hours to fill? What type of structure are you going to put in there? On days you don't have anything, what are you going to do for those 24 hours? I took that to heart and really started putting some structure in my life, focusing on the book's principles, which is mind, body, and rhythm. Positive affirmations, glass half full versus half empty, reframing of the mind. Even if you're going through a real tough situation, what's the positive I can take out of it? Because that naturally will increase that brain chemistry. I never realized the correlation between diet and mental health until I started watching videos. And honestly, those videos that I was watching was really the last year that I was dealing with my addictions. And I was in blackout most of that year. So once I got sober, I started going back and watching this stuff. And maybe it's a bad thing, but it was exactly how I remembered it, even though I couldn't remember anything else during that past year. And also I realized what foods to avoid and what foods to put in my body to drive my serotonin levels. I realized that I had to put together a high protein diet to get my dopamine levels up to a therapeutic level because my dopamine was drained because of all of my usage and alcoholism for that period of time. And, it worked, and it worked a hell of a lot quicker than I ever thought it was going to be. I mean, I was scared going into recovery because you're told you got to change and you got to change everything. But the one thing that we talk about in the book is just progress over perfection. Make one change, make one dietary change, make one activity change. Make a change in regards to the way you're thinking, with positive thoughts and so forth, and just building on it. It's almost like stepping stone where, you got the foundation and you're building it over the period of time. And it just works, along with other things too. I mean, I do believe that people need support groups and AA meetings after dealing with addictions or GA if we're dealing with gambling addictions. But the biggest mistake, in my opinion, and a mistake that I made was, I'd go to those meetings, but I didn't change a damn thing during the day. I was just living my life. It needs to be a lifestyle. There's a difference between being sober and living a lifestyle of recovery.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for anything, it's got to be a lifestyle choice. I mean, I worked as an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor for 27 years, and it was always about consistency, a day at a time, surrendering each day to the disease of alcoholism, or if there was a behavioral addiction we're dealing with. And as you guys mentioned, addiction, whether it's food, whether it's gambling, whether it's shopping, there's always that preoccupation, attempts to control, inability to control, having your life pretty much ravaged because of the consequences of your use or your addiction. There's a variety of different things that can happen. Kelsey mentioned grief. Grief doesn't necessarily have to be because of loss. It could be because of loss of dreams, loss of relationships. And with addiction, whatever type of addiction you're talking about, there's those losses. And like in your case, Mark, there's some you're still trying to rebuild. And those are parts of ourselves that we lose, that we grieve. The other thing that, and this is with addiction, and I saw this, is with addiction due to death. If a person who is addicted lost a buddy who also was addicted, sometimes that grief would get disenfranchised and people would say, well, he was just another addict. It isn't a big deal. And one of the things that I discovered was in working with clients who had relapsed, and specifically around grief, it was some unresolved grief issues that they didn't get a chance to express, and particularly the loss of a close friend, addicted or not addicted, or a family member where they just went self-medicated because they didn't know what else to do. So once we gave them an opportunity to talk about that, it seemed to, it put some clarity to that. It seemed to be helpful to them as far as being that missing piece in terms of their relapse prevention program. And the other thing, and I'm going to get off of my soapbox in a second here and turn it over to you guys. The thing that really very frustrated me about was the perception of addiction and mental health as a stigma around it. With addiction, people being seen as simply their addiction. And I tell my students that I teach at Utica University, treat the addiction separate from the self-esteem of the individual. The person that you're working with, these are typically good people. They are bright, they're creative. When they're sober, they're doing some good stuff. They're good family people, they're hard workers. It's just that they dance with the substance, you know. And somebody who, in bullying, you talk about obesity, kids are bullied because of the way they look. And just because somebody is 50 pounds overweight doesn't make them a bad person. It just means that they're struggling with control over food. They're having trouble maintaining a healthy lifestyle with food. And the key commonality with any addiction is that it's about embracing a lifestyle, a sober lifestyle or a healthy living lifestyle, or in the case of addiction, both healthy and sober.
Yeah, I mean, basically the way we look at it, everyone faces struggles. And whatever struggle you're facing, it's you don't want to avoid it. You want to find a way to become stronger because of it. Or as we like to say, finding purpose in the pain. And that's what we try to relay to the people that we work with. Because you can definitely, I think that a lot of the best learning experiences that you can have in life, come from that adversity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's your greatest opportunity to grow. And that's what I remind people all the time when they call me up and they're going through a real tough time and they're having some negative thoughts. I'm like, this is your greatest opportunity to grow. Is going through this. I always reference a Dalai Lama quote, and life is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yep.
I love that quote. I mean, we get into some deep conversations picking apart that quote. And you are right. I mean, when I start talking to people, and I always try to pay attention to similarities of the story, typically is that one moment where parents go through a divorce and the kids are bouncing between mom and dad's house, and all of a sudden they become a young adult and they start self-medicating.
Yep.
People going through a divorce, themselves, losing a job, financial stress. You're seeing a lot of issues with financial stress right now with the current economic conditions. People don't know how to handle it. They're struggling with it, and they're self-medicating, and it's getting out of control. I work at a behavioral health facility during the day, and the amount of people that are just walking it off the streets asking for help has been unbelievable. Every day, Kelsey and I talk, and we kind of touch base on it. But that's a good thing that they're coming in for help. And I commend them because I believe that's a sign of strength. I was raised in a household where if you asked for help and you shared your feelings, it was almost like a form of weakness, man up and all that stuff. And I tell people all the time, no, asking for help is absolutely a sign of strength. But the issue that you have out there is, there are people coming in asking for help, but how many people are not asking for help? And that's where we got to end this stigma, and that's where we got to provide awareness. Because during Mental Health Awareness Month, I heard an unbelievable stat, and I found it kind of hard to believe that from the first symptom that something is off to the time that an individual actually seeks out help, 11 and a half years go by. And I'm like, well, how could 11 and a half years go by? And then I started thinking about my own story. The first time I had a panic attack, and I didn't even recognize it as a panic attack because of the anxiety I was faced, was in sixth grade doing a presentation on the JFK assassination, and I locked up in front of my speech class and went to the back of the room and started crying because I couldn't get the words out. Had shortness of breath, started sweating, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. Well, guess what? When I got diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and panic disorder? At 43 years old, in the weeds of my addictions, because that was the first time I saw a therapist. So in my case, I'm worse than the statistic. 30 years went by.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary.
Well, you're talking back in the day, the average age of diagnosis, probably back in the 70s and 80s for anybody with alcoholism was probably like late 40s. I remember 5 years before I retired, working in an inpatient substance abuse facility, we were getting 18-year-old opiate addicts, heroin and prescription pain medications. Most individuals start getting addicted to opiates because of physical problems that they've had, and they get prescribed painkillers. I'm thinking to myself, boy, you got 120 pills with 4 refills. You could have medicated a small village with that, literally. And especially if you start doubling up or you're going outside of the prescription or you're misusing the drug, they become highly addictive, and then you need more and you need more and more. And the withdrawal from opiates is unsupervised is brutal.
Oh, absolutely no. Somebody that went through that several times. I don't wish it upon my worst enemy, to be perfectly honest with you.
I could see why you wouldn't. And again, I myself am not a recovering recovering alcoholic, but I've worked with enough over 27 years where they've given me insight into their addiction. They've given me insight to their challenges. And the thing that comes across to me is early experience matters. I get 1 in 3 individuals that came to see me that had a family history of addiction. So you're talking about the generational passage of addiction from one generation to the next. And you're talking about accompanying generational trauma, that if that's not addressed early on, that cycle is going to continue. And once we break that cycle and we introduce some different rules, some different strategies that are going to help individuals embrace healthy lifestyle and healthy living, then that cycle gets broken. But early experience does matter in anything. And boy, if it isn't addressed, it's going to carry on into adulthood like it did for you guys. Tell me, you guys banded together. I know you got the Suffer to Tougher book, but I also know you have a Suffer to Tougher, which is an organization that helps individuals with challenges. So tell us how that came about. Tell us what the mission of Suffer to Tougher is, and who are the people that request your services?
Okay, so we had the idea to do the book. And from the book, when we would start posting about it, when people were reading it, I think they just assumed that we were going to offer coaching services surrounding the book because we'd get people reaching out. I mean, Marc was already getting people reaching out to him through the post that he would put out with the Suffer to Tougher name, because he actually came up with that name before him and I decided to get together on the book. And I love the name so much that we decided to use it for the book. But at the time, we didn't really think that the book was going to become a brand until the response that we got from the book. And we were getting awards and we were getting people approaching us to come on their podcasts and to do public presentations. And so we're like, I guess we have something here. Is this something you want to do? And he would look at me, yeah. Is something you want to do? Yeah. And so we just decided that we were going to start a coaching program. We've done some webinars. We do presentations. We started our podcast simply because we just don't have enough time in the day. And with the podcast, we can help a lot more people who want to listen. And also by bringing guests on that have different issues, we can tackle a lot more different things besides just substances or people who need help with their fitness. We're dealing with a lot of different situations. I was unfamiliar that BPD is even a thing. We had a guy on and I got an education on BPD. And we have another gentleman that was arrested for something that he did. And so he was trying to overcome all the adversity that had come from him having been arrested for a white collar crime and trying to outrun his reputation. And so we've just had so many great opportunities to work with people and to coach people in different circumstances. And it all centers around the same thing. And that's just people want you to listen. They want to be able to talk about their stuff, but they just don't really have the outlet that they feel like they need to be able to do it. Either fear of the shame or fear of the guilt and fear of having to tell people I'm seeing a therapist or I'm on medication but with us, because we're so open, honest, and transparent, and Marc likes to talk about that a lot, but because of the fact that we do that and we're so authentic with how we're, open to anything from anyone, people just come up to us and start opening up to us because they feel like they can. And if we get more people out there thinking that way and acting that way and sharing their own stuff, the more that everybody's going to be open about it. And that's basically what we're built on, is just trying to end the stigma and trying to help people that have mental health problems, even though we all have mental health. It can be good, it can be bad. It's constant flux. You get a text message or a phone call, all of a sudden your mental health could change like that.
Yep.
But everyone thinks that when you think of the words mental health, it must be a bad thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking about it. Not true. Not true at all. But that's why when it comes to mental health, we're doing everything that we can to just normalize it.
Yep.
So you want to add to that, Marc?
I know Kelsey always says I'm humble when I say this. I mean, my story is not special. I mean, it's an everyday American story. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's a lot of white collar professionals that got hooked on this stuff, I guess maybe because I'm so open, honest, and transparent, I don't have any shame or guilt. I almost use my recovery as like a badge, on my chest, if you will. I'm very proud of what I've been able to overcome. I never really thought I was quote unquote a bad person when I was going through those addictions. I knew I was a good person. I just knew that I was sick. And maybe early on I didn't realize I was sick, and I didn't understand the sickness component, but I certainly do now. And I did as my sickness progressed. But it's just been a very humbling experience, from when I started being open, honest, and transparent on Facebook. And I was telling you, the reason why I started doing that is because in May of 2021, I had a cousin, a younger cousin, pass away from alcoholism. And I did not know that she was battling, was part of she was battling until a couple weeks prior to her passing. And here we are in the same family, and she really didn't know everything that I went through and overcame. And I certainly didn't know what she was dealing with until somebody kind of tipped me off. We're in the same family. I went to visit her in the hospital about 13 days prior to her passing away. Spent 3 hours with her, explained everything. She was completely dumbfounded. I do believe I gave her some hope and inspiration, but unfortunately, the damage was already done, and she passed away 13 days later. And honestly, I went to her services, and I was driving home that night. It was 2 months prior to my 1 year sobriety date. I wanted to wait about a year being sober before I started getting active in recovery. And I'm like, I just can't keep this a secret anymore, because if I was more open, honest, and transparent, maybe she would have sought guidance a little sooner. Maybe I've been able to provide some assistance. So I'm like, you know what? We're starting. And I wasn't literal on social media. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic in recovery. I was just putting little memes out there that you can read between the lines. And honestly, from day one, people that I knew from the insurance industry, acquaintances, people started reaching out on Messenger. And I'm like, it really just shocked the hell out of me how common this is and how many families are affected by this. And honestly, it got so overwhelming, I had to create some space. So I created that recovery page on social media just to kind of have some,
Barrier.
yeah, the barriers are between the personal stuff and that. And that's how the whole name Suffer the Tougher came about. I mean, I was thinking of different names, and I'm not a really creative person, and I'm writing different names down, and it just came to me. And I'm like, man, this is actually pretty cool, because I can relate to that name. I mean, it kind of defines me as far as like what I went through. And then we created that page, and it just started growing. And then I started speaking at hospitals. I started getting active in support groups, leading to like dual diagnosis support groups and things like that. And it just got to the point where there were so many people reaching out that, initially I was doing insurance once I had a stretch of recovery, just like a 9 to 5 type of job. And like literally, I didn't have enough hours in the day to return all the phone calls or messages that were coming in the evening time, during the day in the evening time, because so many people were reaching out. And, that really helped me out. I realized, you know what, just like somebody was there for me, we're there for them. If they feel comfortable talking to us, or if we can give them some guidance and get them on the sobriety path, and get their mental health in check, and get them to a point where they're flourishing again in life, we're going to help them. And I've seen so many frigging miracles. It's unbelievable. I mean, people off of fentanyl, people off of other hard drugs, people off of alcohol completely changed their lives.
Well, and you two both have lived experience, so that increases your credibility with anybody that's coming in with challenges. So you can use that to your advantage, and individuals are going to listen. But the other thing is that you listen first. And so many times individuals that come from unhealthy homes aren't listened to. They're talked at, but they're not listened to. And I've worked with clients who have told me that, I just listened to their story. I just wanted to get the full picture before I responded to anything or made suggestions. And there were clients that said, you're the first person that's ever listened to me. And I tell my students, I said, if you're going to establish yourself as a good therapist, you got to establish yourself as a good listener first.
Yep.
Because if you don't listen, you're not going to get the full picture. And if you don't get the full picture, you're not going to be on point with any suggestions that you make about, about a recovery path or treatment suggestions. So you have to listen. You need to be silent, let that story unfold. Because for that client, that may be the first time that they had a chance to be listened to without judgment.
Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah,
going to get them coming back.
And I think that's what's interesting is because I had 30 years in the insurance industry on the sales side and then also the management side, combined 30 years. But being a good sales rep is listening to the client, figuring out what their needs are, and putting a plan in place to address their needs. Which recovery?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost the exact same thing, just a completely different arena.
And you can use that framework for coaching because that's what
Absolutely.
you guys do. That's what you guys do. What do you need and what do you think we need to do to get there? So let's work together to figure this out.
So one thing, if you don't mind, that I'd also like to mention is that when we would do our presentations around the book or book signings and, saying a few words, we obviously would open up for Q&A afterwards. And one question that we kept having come up was, have you guys ever thought about writing a book for mental health for children? And we kept getting that question. And it was like, every time it was like someone was standing out there with a bow and arrow and directing it straight at my heart. Because knowing that my mental health struggles really started as a young child and wishing that I had some kind of resource like that, we originally had already talked about it before that started coming up. And we said, maybe about a year after Suffer to Suffer, that book comes out, maybe we'll think about doing that. And the more it came up, it was more like the universe was just kind of like nudging us, like, come on, how about now? And so eventually I was like, no, we got to do this. And so we decided to put out that book only about 4 months after Suffer to Suffer came out. And that book is called You're Not Broken. And it's a book for children. It is written so that any child from a 3rd grade on up level should be able to understand most of it. And the stuff that they don't understand, it's because it's stuff they've never faced before. And that's okay. It's not really introducing them to anything that would be potentially harmful. But if it talks about substances, if there's any substance use going on in the home, that's just not going to register. It'll just go right over their head. But if there are substances in the home, it's going to help them learn how to deal with that and how to move forward from that, not to get sucked into that, to how to deal with family members that have situations like that. But I mean, anything from, bullying to, depression, or, if you're not performing well in school, if you're not a good athlete, I mean, anything that I could think of. And, and then Mark and I would throw ideas at each other, but we're talking 30 chapters, so 30 different things that kids go through and a way to help them move forward and not to feel mental health before they're old enough to handle mental health.
Yeah.
Interest of cyberbullying, parents getting a divorce from their young age, going through a move and having to switch schools and having to meet all new friends. I mean, all real life stuff, man.
Yeah. And, a lot of times with children, depending on the age, a lot of times what they think happens with their parents is their fault. If the parents got divorced,
For sure.
it's that magical thinking, well, Jesus, maybe if I was a better kid, maybe if I didn't cause them so much pain, maybe if I didn't get in so much trouble, or if they didn't have to discipline me so much, they would be together. And, they need to learn that, no, it wasn't your fault that your parents divorced. It was what was going on with your parents that caused them to divorce. It wasn't, if anything, you probably kept them together longer than they should have been together.
I have a personal experience with that. I grew up my whole life believing that my sister didn't have a father because of me. My sister was older and my father always wanted a daughter. He didn't want a son. And when I was born, I was very sick for the first few years of my life, being rushed back and forth to the hospital. And that was getting in the way of my father's social schedule. And it didn't allow him to live the life that he wanted to live. There was an altercation that my sister still for most of her lifetime could recount this story herself, where my mom wanted to take me to the hospital and my father stood in front of the door and said, he's not meant to live. Just let him go. And my mom literally knocked him on his butt and walked out the door with me and took me to the hospital. So, but that it wasn't that long after that my father decided to leave. It wasn't the life that he wanted. So I had to live with the guilt of thinking that because of me, my sister lost her father. It happens.
And I think as we get older, we realize that your father left, it wasn't because of you. He made that choice to leave,
Yeah.
but still we're kids. We think that's where our heads go. We think it's something we did to cause it. So, and the other thing too, with mental health with children is also the impact that their parents' behavior has on them moving forward, that they could have the chance to develop their own addictions, their own, problems with intimacy down the road, depending on what they see. And, certainly that addiction of any type of addiction can be a family disease because it has an impact on the family, and particularly on the children that are in that family are witnessing that firsthand.
Within the last 60 to 90 days, there was a study that came out in Brazil talking about modeling behavior. And they dove into that about substances with the parents or alcohol with the parents, and like what the percentages are of the children that struggle with alcohol and substances when it's modeled by their parents as they're growing up. And the statistics were absolutely overwhelming. And I thought it was very interesting, and I it was actually a clinical therapist that brought this to my attention, and I kind of made a joke. I'm like, well, you're never going to see that report done here in the United States, because I guarantee you the numbers are probably going to be a hell of a lot more than what it is in Brazil. The Suffer the Tougher book, I mean, it's designed to be more like a resource guide. I mean, we want people to highlight it, put notes in it, put it on the shelf, and when challenging times occur, pick it back up and read it. And that's really what I envision it with this whole kids book thing. And I'm going to commend Kelsey here. After we had a lot of conversations, but he really spearheaded that movement to get that book out as quick as we got that book out. It was designed for the youth, and it was needed at that particular time because I was doing some volunteer work at this new crisis department in the suburbs of Chicago. After we were approached at a book signing by a group of teachers that were telling us that we need to do this, and I saw a lot of younger individuals coming in, a lot of self-harm under the age of 10.
Yep.
And I would tell Kelsey, I'm like, man, this is unbelievable, Now, what's interesting about this is we've had adults, I had a copy of the book, read that book, okay? And then literally, Kelsey's had this situation. I've had this situation multiple times, calling us up, like literally in tears, because it provides them clarity as far as what happened when they were younger that led them to their struggles of mental health and or some type of addictive tendencies, and almost allowed them to give a radical acceptance. Okay, this all makes sense now. And that was not the intention. We never expected those phone calls, and it really blew us away.
Well, and knowledge is power. If you give individuals the tools to understand what's going on, their inside is saying, well, I know something needs to change. Now they have the tools to know how to change it.
Exactly.
And so once you give them that education, that empowers them to move forward behaviorally and engage in behavior that's going to be consistent with healthy and sober living.
Absolutely.
Your podcast, I know you mentioned your podcast earlier, but tell us a little more about the Rebuild and Fulfill podcast in terms of how that came to be and how it aligns with everything else you're doing.
Yeah. So Marc from the jump, I mean, so he's done a lot of podcasts. One of the organizations that he's affiliated with, he does a podcast with them a couple times a month. So he was far more familiar with doing podcasts, but as a guest. And he's like, everyone keeps telling me we need to do a podcast. And he had so much experience doing podcasts. And I'm like, I'm just trying to handle everything that we had going because neither one of us are very tech savvy, but I had more time to dive in to learn technology than Marc did. So I've been doing crash courses of everything. And I said, just give me some time on this podcast thing. I really want to do it, but I know the time is going to be right and I'll know it when it's right. Just give me a minute. And as soon as I learned how to do it and we started doing podcasts, it's almost like, Marc, why didn't you let me do this before? But now we're very much into doing podcasts together, bringing on guests. We actually started using Podmatch recently to find extra guests that have journeys and stories that are unfamiliar to us, which is exciting, so that we can bring those people on and we can learn from them just the way that other people are trying to learn from us. And it's been a great learning experience. It's been a bit overwhelming at times where just trying to figure out one thing in terms of editing a podcast might take me an hour. I mean, not so much anymore, but in the beginning. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been really rewarding. And little by little, we've been ramping up the amount of episodes that we're doing. We had set a goal of at least one a week. And now that's turning into 2 and sometimes 3 if we have a special episode or a reason to do a special episode. We have a conversation with someone and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need to put something out about this. So we kind of use the inspiration as a reason sometimes to do a podcast that we may not have planned on, but something that just seemed like it was very in the moment. Obviously, we made a big deal during May of, with Mental Health Awareness Month and trying to create that awareness and also allow people to use the month of May to really ignite some feelings and some plans of action for the rest of the year instead of just, okay, I'm aware of mental health, great. And then for 11 months, they do nothing with mental health. But to use it as a springboard for how they're going to handle their mental health and people around them's mental health for the rest of the year. So it definitely gave us a platform for that. But it's been really exciting and a lot of fun.
Yeah, the nice thing, and another podcaster told me this, you could do a podcast and it's going to stay there unless you take it down. But 5 months after you do the podcast, somebody might find that episode and it's had an impact, or it might have saved them from doing something that they would have regretted later. So I think that's the beauty of it. And I just wish you well with that as you continue to move forward. So
Thank you. And we love learning from people like you. I mean, you've been in the trenches doing this for a while. I've watched some of your episodes and been like, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I should try that in my next episode. So, I mean, we appreciate you too, because that's, we're learning.
it's an ever evolving process in terms of doing anything, whether it's podcast editing, coming up with ideas for an episode, but it's like, the mantra of this podcast is we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. So I learn, pick up bits and pieces from everybody, and that makes it great, because it means that many people, even people that may not even know this, have had a success in what I've done, and I think that's pretty cool. So, boy, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think we've covered a lot of great topics. But I'm going to ask you guys one more question. I'm going to have each of you respond to this separately. If you could leave our audience with one thing that you want them to remember from this episode today, what would that be? And whoever wants to start, Kelsey or Marc, feel free to jump in.
Well, I'm a firm believer in this. If there's a pulse, there is hope, and transformation is absolutely possible.
And for me, one of our catchphrases from our book, and I used it as the title for the children's book, is "You're not broken." And then we usually follow that up with, "You may just be overloaded." So basically what I'm saying with that is your struggle's real, but it doesn't have to become your identity. So no matter where you are today, your next chapter can be stronger than your last one.
And the other thing that reminds me is that we're not broken. I remember, this is part of an Ernest Hemingway quote from one of his books, is that sometimes we get stronger at the broken places. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a lot of truth to that, because at some time in our life breaks us, whether it's addiction, whether it's death, whether it breaks us. But we become stronger at those places that are broken. If, as you said, we choose to do that. And if we choose to get stronger, we can. And I suffer to tougher. I got to say this. That is the definition of resilience, is suffer to tougher. So I love that. So, and I may have to remember that. I may have to suffer to tougher is being resilient. So if you guys don't mind, I might share that.
It gets the words out there, man. Use it as much as you want.
All right. I will do that. But I always ask first. I never assume.
We got to get them a T-shirt, Kelsey. You wear that T-shirt in public, people are going to be asking you, what the hell does that mean? Because we get it all the time.
Hey, I love T-shirts. So, yeah, I mean, I'll grab a T-shirt from you.
Yeah, I'll get your address. We'll send you one.
My last question. People want to get in touch with you, contract for your coaching services, purchase your books. What's the best way for them to do that?
All that type of stuff is off of our website. So that's suffer2tougher, O-R-G. That the website has our books, has our courses, has our T-shirts and hats, polos, hoodies, anything that you could possibly want to support the movement. But on socials, S2T Nation is a way that you can find us on Facebook. And then we're both very easily accessible on LinkedIn and on Facebook on our personal profiles. And we also actually have a community group where people are supporting each other, and that's Stronger Together with S2T. And then our podcast, we promote that mostly on our YouTube channel, which is Rebuild and Fulfill.
And I will make sure all of your contact information, social media links get in the episode notes before we go live. Marc, one last question. How many years have you been sober?
July 17th. So coming up here in a little bit. Not sure when this is going to drop, but 6 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I celebrate anybody who's in recovery because one of the myths about addiction, people don't get better from addiction, but they do. There's people that die from it, but there's a lot of people that recover, and that's what we have to celebrate. So congratulations, and keep up the great work that you're doing to help others. And you too, Kelsey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.